Hello friends, welcome to Tarun IAS. Today we will be discussing the editorial from the Hindu of 13th of December 2022. So let's start with today's editorial. The title of the editorial is about the big tech and the need in India for ex-ante regulation. You can relate it with your General Studies Paper 3 syllabus, Indian economy, that too the sectors of economy and mobilization of the resources. Now, what are these big tech companies? Big tech companies are those companies which relies on the technology for their revenue generation and for their business. For example, Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, etc. These are all big tech companies. Now, what is the meaning of ex-ante? See, the meaning of ex-ante is that before the event has happened, before these big tech companies start to take undue advantage of their market position to extract revenue from the consumers and from the government, then before this event happens, the government should take a forecast and government should understand the market position of these big tech and bring a legislation in this regard. So let's talk about the article and what it has to say. The article has been written by Amar Patnaik, who is a member of parliament of Rajya Sabha from Odisha and is also an advocate, and he was a former bureaucrat and CAG, that is Comptroller and Auditor General of India. Now let us see what is the context here. Now if we talk about the context, then in October we had discussed in one of our editorial that how the Competition Commission of India had basically imposed a penalty on Google of rupees 1,337.76 crore for abusing its dominant position in the market, especially in the mobile devices. Now, these big tech companies, what they do, they basically try to extract revenue by exploiting their market position, by making the consumers agree with their terms and conditions which are revenue generating and which are profiting to the company. In order to avoid such malpractices in the market and in order to avoid any undue advantage by a particular company in the market, India had in the year 2022 had passed a legislation by the name Competition Commission of India and established a body by the same name so as to prevent undue advantage, so as to have a fair competition in the market. Now, if we look at the market condition, then definitely a company having a dominant position is quite natural. But what the Competition Commission of India does is that it prevents the company to exploit its dominant position and take undue advantage of its dominant position. This is what the role of the Competition Commission of India is. If we compare the Indian legislation and the India's position with respect to the other Western countries and the highly developed countries, then in case of the European Union, in case of the United States and Australia, they have also understood that how they exploit their market position and they have a market distorting abilities. Therefore, if we take example of EU, then it has passed a very important law, that is the EU's Digital Market Act and the Gatekeepers Act, which is going to enforce all the rules and regulation ex ante to foresee that how these anti-competitive practices they are played by these big tech companies. And this is a case in point that India should learn that how we can also have an ex ante regulation to prevent these companies from taking advantage of their position. In this context only, the India has introduced a competition amendment bill, and it is going to be a proposed bill. However, the writer says that it partially addresses the issue because India should have used this chance to overhaul its competition law, especially when it is concerned or which is going to be presented in the Parliament's winter session, that is the coming session. So, what is this market dominance issue? Now, the writer says that in any free economy, market dominance is natural. But what is not natural is the abuse of the dominant position. In order to prevent such competition, the CCI had to say that the intent of the Google's business was to make users agree to its revenue generating policy, and that is basically the online search to directly affect the sale of their online advertising services. So this is how the Google was exploiting the market and generating revenue, and that is the reason why CCI had imposed penalty on Google in October this year, that is 2022. All right. Now what happens? Thus the network effects. Now, this status quo base which is created, this creates a significant barrier for the competitors to enter or operate in the market which is concerned. So therefore, the competition law, which normally addresses this anomaly, they become slow to respond to this complex technical sector. And by the time the order is passed, the dominant player has gained an edge in case of the Google. Now what the writer wants to say, that if we do not quickly reform our laws, or we do not make our laws ex-ante, that means the law has to be in such a manner that it forecasts a particular situation, and it forms a regulation with respect to that. So therefore, the writer says that if we do consider the case of Google here, then it is an urgent need for us that we have an ex-ante legislation which will prevent the market failures, and it will also mitigate any anti-competitive conduct by any big tech companies. So if in this context, if I talk about that what India has done so far, then the first thing that India did was the equalization levy. The second thing, this was in the year 2016 probably. Then before this, we had Competition Commission of India Act of the year 2022, right? So these are two important legislation that are going to govern the market dominant position of any big tech companies. However, apart from this, we do require an ex-ante legislation that is going to particularly and specifically overlook all these, or we can amend the CCI in order to have it in pace with the current situation. All right. Now, what else we can do is to have a personal data protection law. Now all these laws, they are in, if we could integrate all these laws in such a manner that these big tech companies cannot exploit their market position. There can be market position which is quite natural, as the writer said. However, the company cannot exploit these market position. This is what the point of writer is. Now let us understand this predatory pricing in a very simple manner. Say for example, in China, steel is made, and if it is made as, let's say, 80 rupees per kg. However, when China exports the steel to India, it exports it at, let's say, 50 rupees per kg. Now the imported steel is cheaper than the domestic steel which is produced at, let's say, 100 rupees per kg. Domestic steel buyers, especially the automobile industry and the manufacturing and the construction business, they are going to prefer steel from China. Now basically, China, by reducing the price of their exported steel, has captured the market, and this is what is known as the predatory pricing. That means lowering of the prices that forces the other firms out of the competition, and this is exactly what's done by Amazon and Flipkart, who were accused of deep discounting, and they were creating in-house brands to compete with the local sellers. So therefore, the government of India had passed one law in the year 2021, that was the regulation of the e-commerce. And in fact, in the year 2022 only, the government of India had passed the e-commerce regulation rules. And if we speak of the recent context, then the CCI raided their office, that is the Amazon and Flipkart, anti-competition probe, which led the Amazon being forced to cut out its deal with the cloud tail, which is basically an inventory of the Amazon. Therefore, the pricing by big tech companies, it plays, according to the writer, a fundamental role in defining its digital position of any digital platform in the marketplace. If I speak of the e-commerce in India, then e-commerce in India is not, it's basically a market based model. That means the Amazon and Flipkart, they are only going to provide the platform to the sellers where the sellers and buyers would meet. It's not an inventory model. Therefore, Amazon and Flipkart are only going to provide the platform. In this context, there is one more thing that you could relate it with this article, is the open commerce platform. Here what would happen, here the government of India had decided, just in case of the UPI, just as the government of India did with the UPI, that it interlinked all the UPI, all the e-wallet platforms, and there was an interlinking, and there was an usage that was what do we say, promoted. So here also, in case of the open e-commerce platform, what would happen, even if you have an account on Flipkart, you would not have to make an account, a separate account on Amazon. If there is a seller present on the Amazon and you have an account on Flipkart, then you can from your Flipkart account buy the product from the Amazon, from the seller which is registered on Amazon. So this is basically an open e-commerce platform. This is what the government of India is trying to explore. So in this context, you can also relate it with this new phenomena. So therefore, prices, they play a fundamental role in defining the position of these big tech markets and these big tech companies. This becomes an essential to establish an ex-ante framework to ensure that there is a level playing field for the local sellers also, and the local sellers do not feel exploited, they do not feel out of market. The government's open network for digital commerce, I already have explained you what this open network for digital commerce means. Basically, this is going to be a reliable platform for the small players. And these e-commerce companies, they generally, if you visit Amazon, you will see this word written, sponsored. Now what happened, when you search for something, if you're not searching for any product, let's say you are searching for moisturizer, so all the moisturizers which have been promoted, which have paid to be promoted on the Amazon platform, they would be first one to be present on the first page. This is called as the market, exploiting the market dominant position. The local sellers who are providing the good quality moisturizers will not be available on the first page, and generally we do not skip to the 4 and 5 or 6 page, and we skip the local sellers product. So this is how the Amazon was exploiting the platform, and the local sellers were finding it very difficult to sell their products. However, the e-commerce regulation rules of the year 2022 has also provided the rules where these products which are sponsored in nature cannot destroy the market position of the local sellers, and they also have the level playing field. So similarly, government has also brought another concept to have a transparency and reduce opacity when it comes to the business on the e-commerce sites. It is open network for digital commerce, and I have already explained you what this was all about. Now, when I speak of the crucial aspect of the self-preferencing beyond the search algorithm is the bundling of the services, especially with pre-installed apps where the manufacturer eliminates competition without the consumer consent. Now, what the writer wants to say here, suppose you buy a mobile phone, right? There are pre-installed apps in it, for example, apps for Amazon, etc., etc. So basically, these apps, they become so lucrative to the consumer that the consumer wouldn't care to download any other app. So this is how the mobile companies, so for example, Google has its own mobile phones. For example, Samsung, they have Samsung mobile phones, they come with pre-installed apps. Now what happens with these pre-installed apps, we as a consumer tends to overlook other options. There is no alternative for us. This is something very similar to the supermarket phenomena, where they try to display all the products that they want to sell to the consumers at their eye level. So whenever you enter a supermarket, your eyes, they grab those products which the supermarket wants to sell to you. So you quickly look at those products, and you find them attractive, regardless of whether they're of any use to you or not, you buy them. So this is exactly what happens with the pre-installed apps. You do not look for any alternative, you do not tend to search. Especially the mobile device companies, they exploit their market position, they have a tie-up with the apps, etc., etc., and this is how they try to generate revenues. So this is what the writer has to say, that the pre-installed apps also, which provides bundles of services, they also eliminate the competition without the consumer's consent. If we talk about the recent example, it is of the example of Apple, which has been given by the writer. In US and Europe, because of these pre-installed apps, and after the Apple was forced out of Russia, so Indian competition law needs to be vigilant through an ex-ante framework. So therefore, learning from the other countries and learning from the experience of other developing nation and learning from their legislation, India can also come up with a ex-ante regulation or ex-ante legislation. Now, when we say that the data economy is evolving, so we have not dealt with the regulation effectively. If the data economy is evolving, if we are living in a world where the information is economy, then we need to have regulations so which matches pace with the evolving economy. There is a sensitive data stored on these platforms, and they can be exploited by the big corporation for their advantage. They have the ownership of the right to use or transfer this data without any restriction. Sometimes what happens when we install an app, a dialog box opens and wants to receive your affirmation, or it wants to have you in agreement with the rules and regulation or terms and conditions of that app. When we do want to use that app, we do not even read the whole terms and condition, and we skip to the agree part, and we quickly click that button and we move on to using that app. But less do we know, these companies, they use our data, our carbon footprint, or more technically speaking, the silicon footprint that we leave on the digital platforms, and they use that silicon footprint to basically have a surveillance on us. And they basically, with their own, without our consent, they customize services for us. So this is what the exploitation of the dominant position means. So therefore, in order to prevent the misuse of the sensitive data that consumers or the online or the users on the online platform leaves in the form of their silicon footprint, we need to have ex-ante regulation. That's what the writer wants to say. So the writer says that the greed for data is a motivation for these companies. For example, the storage and collection of women's and children data, they need to be dealt with more cautious at the digital platform. So therefore, in my opinion, you can connect this article with your personal data protection bill, which is yet to be passed by the parliament. You need to connect it with this bill as well. Now, finally, the writer says that the market distortion can also lead to the poor quality. Now, what are the impact of the market distortion? The first one is the poor quality of services. It also talks about the data monopoly, and it also talks about stifle of competition. Right. Now, for a consumer, there is a need to establish harmony of the competition law with the new Consumer Protection Act of 2020 and e-commerce rules. So, like I said, that you need to link this article with CCI, with the Consumer Protection Act of the year 2020, and also the e-commerce rules, which was recently given by the government of India. Right. So, the new law, they should ensure a fair competition. And it should also have a provision for penalties, for misuse, for bad practices, for unfair competition, and it also should impose some restrictions on these big tech companies to ensure that there is a proportionate compensation for the consumer losses. So it also talks about the compensation. Now, let us talk about the digital age. We know that we are living in a digital age, the information economy, the data is the key to the economy, etc., etc. Thus, it becomes essential for any country to have a level playing field to ensure that there is a fair opportunity to the new age startups, to the micro, small and medium enterprises. The Competition Act of the year 2000, it was largely constituted, and yes, of course, we did amend the Competition Act in the year 2020. So this is important. So the writer says that there is an urgent need to contextualize the law. By contextualizing the law, writer means that it has to be in pace with the digital economy. So EU has already noted this, and it has brought the Digital Markets Act, and it is time for India to have a similar legislations. What is important is that the Kirana stores, they were out competed by the retailers such as the big baskets. This was an unfair competition between the legacy business, for example, the Kirana stores, and this is a local seller. Kirana stores means local ration shops. Now, Kirana shops, they faced big competition from the big basket. Big Basket. It was an online platform where you can buy your ration, etc., etc. So therefore we need to have ex-ante regulations so as to preserve our local sellers, our domestic sellers, not have them out competed by these big tech companies who are so advanced, and they can exploit their market position, especially at the digital platforms, where as a consequences we can have high unemployment. Our MSMEs and the newly aged startups could also be impacted. And MSMEs, if we talk about their competition, they contribute to 30% of the GDP. We cannot afford to lose it. So therefore, there is a need to have ex-ante regulation. So with this, we finish this article. I hope you understood it, and you can connect it with your main syllabus and with different issues surrounding the periphery issues with it. So thank you so much for watching Tarun IAS. If you want to download the PDF of this session, you can go to our Telegram channel. The link will be given in the description below. Have a nice day.